When is it okay to give up on a game? When is it okay to accept you're never even going to give a game a chance? Well, whenever you want is the answer to that. It's your life, spend it however you deem best. But as someone who considers themselves something of a connoisseur of gaming, and who takes an interest in the design philosophies behind games, I'd like to think I have broad tastes and am willing to give most things a go. That's not true, of course. In some ways I have rather narrow, rather niche tastes, but sometimes I encounter games that I feel I really should like, but for certain reasons I just cannot bring myself to play them more than a few hours, or at all in some cases. This is a video about some of those games. I have no doubt that Fallout New Vegas is a great game. I understand it also has some flaws, but so many people whose opinions I respect claim that it's one of the best written and deepest RPGs ever made. I was recently watching, for about the 5th time, H-Bomberguy's video on New Vegas, and he made many compelling points about how the game is reactive to your decisions and how the morality it presents you with is a cut above the binary good and bad choices of many other similar games. He talks about the characters' motivations being complex and realistic and how the game actually has substantial things to say. Which all sounds great to me, particularly having recently played and absolutely loved Baldur's Gate 3, which did all those things too, albeit in a very different setting. And many of my favourite games from the past have attempted and largely achieved similar things, like Planescape Torment, Disco Elysium, and hell, even the original Fallouts 1 and 2. So I should be eager to play New Vegas. Indeed, I should have played it long ago. It's been in my Steam library for many, many years. And yet I haven't played it, and I strongly doubt I ever will. The reason for this is simple. Well, the main reason is simple at least, and can be summed up in not many words. I think the game is ugly as hell. I think it looks terrible, with almost no redeeming features. It's the colour palette that's mainly to blame, that hideous yellow sheen, the dusty, grimy textures, the dreary, radioactive light. It's just so unpleasant. To my eyes, it's maybe the worst example of the overbearingly grim brown and grey colour palettes and bilious green and yellow lighting that dominated games of the time. Of course, the obvious response to that is to say, well, it's a post-apocalyptic world. The bright lights of civilization have been extinguished, or mostly extinguished. The land has been flooded with radiation. The sky itself has been tainted by man's hubris. So what do you expect? Sunshine and rainbows? Well, no, that's not what I expect, and that's a perfect justification as to why the game needed to be the way it is. But no logical or rational argument can change the fact that New Vegas is a game that I find visually repellent, and that even the great things I hear about its narrative and storytelling are not enough to encourage me to spend any time at all trudging through its depressing world. I simply cannot imagine spending hours and hours in that world, that yellow light flooding out of my monitor, bathing my already pale and sickly face in its unpleasant glow. But I hear you say in the fake imagined argument in my head, if you're willing to ignore a great game based on appearances alone, doesn't this admission rather diminish your credibility as a game critic? Well, thank you, imagined arguer, for presupposing that I had any credibility, or indeed that I am a game critic. But yes, as a game critic, it would be remiss of me to shrug off a game just because I didn't like how it looked. As some guy with opinions on the internet though, it's a valid choice. That doesn't mean it's a good choice though. Maybe I'm missing out. Well, definitely I'm missing out on some of the best storytelling in video games apparently. But I'm okay with that. The thing is, I'm not short of good storytelling in my life, it's just that most of it I get through media other than games. Mostly books, sometimes TV, occasionally films. But those are all passive media, the imagined argument continues. You have no agency in them. This is true, but again, I'm pretty much okay with that. I'd rather be told a story than asked to construct one myself. Which, incidentally, is exactly the opposite of what H-Bomberguy says in his video. And if I did want to construct one myself, I wouldn't do it in the dreary world of New Vegas. And here's another thing, I can afford to be choosy. In fact, I'd say I can't afford not to be choosy. I have plenty of free time, but there's still only so many hours in the day I can devote to gaming, and thanks to a huge Steam backlog and subscription services packed with games of varying quality, there literally aren't enough hours in the day, the week, the year, or the decade for me to play all the ones that interest me. Beyond a decade, I'm not even willing to think in such expansive terms. If I'm alive in 10 years, that'll be enough for me, and any gaming I'm doing will be a nice bonus. So I have to make choices. I have to be discriminating. And yeah, I'll probably make the rather poor choice to just play Path of Exile for another 1,000 hours while sporadically trying out other games I consider to be top priority, but that just makes the prioritization all the more important. There are other reasons I don't think I'll ever play New Vegas. I did not really enjoy the fundamental gameplay of Fallout 3 or 4. both of which I played for a good few hours before giving up, and Bethesda's tech seems particularly bad for immersive storytelling, in my opinion at least. I know a lot of people love the jankiness of it all, but for me the massively inappropriate reactions of NPCs as they desperately try to stick to their scripting no matter what's going on around them really does a lot to quash my investment in the narrative. This is one benefit that books tend to have over video games: the characters do what they're told. I do find New Vegas to be an interesting game. Like I say, I've watched H-Bomber Guy's video on it numerous times, not to mention Noah Caldwell-Gervais' video on the entire Fallout series. But watching a video or two about it is as far as I've ever desired to go. So New Vegas is one of a few games that, although genuinely interesting to me, I have no intention to ever play. There are far more games that are genuinely interesting to me which I have played, but never got too far through, and often for reasons that are tough to explain. Dragon Quest XI is a good example. I played it, but I didn't finish it. In fact, I didn't even get close to finishing it, although I have spent quite a few more hours with it than any other game on this list, and I think the reasons why it failed to engage me are worth looking at. Dragon Quest is an ancient and venerable JRPG series predating even Final Fantasy, but my experience with it was not vast. I'd played and greatly enjoyed Dragon Quest Builders, and also played and not really enjoyed Dragon Quest Warriors, but those are spin-offs and aren't representative of the traditional JRPG gameplay of the main series. As a self-professed JRPG fan, I've always been interested in playing a Dragon Quest game, but for various reasons I've never got around to it. Even from the first trailers I saw of Dragon Quest XI, I found myself feeling oddly ambivalent. The game had a crisp, simple, cartoony look to it that seemed rather charming, but also a little dull. The characters were based on designs by Akira Toriyama, world-renowned creator of the Dragon Ball series, and again, I saw a superficial appeal to them, but they seemed a little bland, a little generic. But the game got some excellent reviews and truly effusive praise from certain people, so I figured that there must be something really great at the heart of Dragon Quest XI. When I started playing, my first impressions were positive, in a muted kind of way. It was all pleasantly bright and colourful and light-hearted, but it also seemed rather, well, generic. But hey, the JRPG's genre is one I love, so maybe it's okay to be generic. However, over the next half dozen hours or so, nothing grabbed me. The characters, the locations, the plot developments, I just could not bring myself to care. I really wanted to like it, and it had got such good reviews, including some that did a really good job of making it seem like the defining JRPG of the millennium. Plus, a lot of people said that it really got good several dozens of hours in, but ultimately I made the painful decision to give up on it. The time thing was a major factor. Like I say, I'm not short on spare time, but literally dozens of hours to get to the good part. There are other games I could have been playing. Plus, that's not quite how people phrased it. It wasn't dozens of hours to get to the good part, it was more like dozens of hours to get to the part where it became incredibly awesome. These people considered the game to be excellent right from the start, but I didn't. So putting in those dozens of hours just to find out that I didn't find it quite so incredibly awesome seemed like a real risk. Still, I felt a sort of guilt about quitting, kind of like what I was talking about in my video about the Lucky Dime Caper. There was nothing wrong with Dragon Quest XI, and in pretty much every respect it should have been my sort of thing. It was pleasant to look at, the combat was fine, there were parts I enjoyed, but overall I just found it dull. Have I missed out? Would the game have finally hooked me in after dozens of hours? I'll never find out. Dropping a game because it just didn't suck you in is valid, even if you really feel like you should persist. But here's an example of a game I dropped for a more specific reason, and arguably not a good one. That game is The Outer Wilds. No, sorry, I mean The Outer Worlds. I have played The Outer Wilds, and that one I did not quit halfway through. Great game. Maybe I'll do a video on it one day. But yes, The Outer Worlds. What do you know, it was developed by Obsidian, who did New Vegas. But this game looked fine to me, good even. I was excited to play a game that promised to be a modern, updated New Vegas. And it seemed pretty good to start with. Interesting setting, cool characters, decent writing, even if the satire was a bit blunt and I really got sick of hearing "it's not the best choice, it's Space's choice" every few minutes. I was pretty sure I was going to stick with it. But then, and this is going to seem like a dodgy reason to be turned off by a game, especially a game like this, but hey, that's what this video is about. One of the first major quests in the Outer World sees you dealing with a group of deserters who have left the main settlement to forge their own lives away from the corporate tyranny that dominated their existences. After a convoluted series of events, you're faced with a choice that boils down to diverting water to the deserters or to the main settlement. It's a fundamentally simple question. Who do you want to help? The deserters or the corporation? and the game does a really good job of giving you compelling reasons why either decision would be valid. In fact, I'd say it does too good a job. While playing through the quest, I could almost see the writers at work, trying to balance everything out so that there was no black and white morality, only grey. The deserters are only trying to find peace and independence, right? But how about if their motives were dubious and their leader was kind of evil? And the corporation is greedy and exploitative, right? But how about if the main settlement offered genuine stability and the people living there were actually pretty okay? So that's a good thing, right? No easy choices, no binaries of good and evil. In theory, yes, but in practice it was also obviously arranged that way. The subversions of expectation were so, well, expected that the grey morality seemed as arbitrary and uninteresting as a good and evil binary. Tim Kaine, one of the directors of The Outer Worlds, started a YouTube channel not that long ago and has been uploading regular videos where he talks about his experiences, the projects he's worked on, and his design philosophies. They're very interesting and I recommend checking them out, link in the description. But some of the things he's said have made me wonder if he's perhaps most responsible for the reasons I found The Outer Worlds to ring a little hollow. He's very interested in systems of gameplay, of character development, of world building, and in how to balance those systems. I've wondered if maybe that preoccupation with balance came at the cost of creating a narrative that rang true, and choices that had a little more nuance to them. I'm just speculating, of course, but that is how it felt to play The Outer Wilds. Outer Worlds, damn it. I know how this might sound, like I'm complaining about choices being too balanced or too well thought out. The thing is though, when you perfectly balance right and wrong in a game focused on morality, it ends up being as uninteresting as if there was no balance at all. But look, I didn't play much of the game, so I'm not condemning it. I just don't have much interest in playing it further. And incidentally, just in case it seems I'm focusing on Obsidian too much, I did really enjoy Pillars of Eternity. And honestly, the reason I've talked about two of their game series is mostly because I find them really interesting. I just have some arguably petty reasons for not playing them. Okay, how about Resident Evil Village? Now, I admit that I haven't really given up on this game. In fact, I'd say there's a reasonable chance I will continue playing it at some point. But there was one moment near the start that, if I hadn't been live streaming at the time, may have made me just quit out. Incidentally, because I was live streaming, this footage contains my stupid fat face. Sorry about that. This is only 40 minutes into the game. You're wandering cautiously through the eponymous village when suddenly you're set upon by shambling, shaggy lycanthropes. Or something. You can try to fight, or you can try to run away, but if you're me, eventually you die. So you try again. And again you fight, run, die. Except this time I didn't die. I don't know why, maybe I'd survived long enough to trigger the next cutscene, or maybe I'd gone to the right place, but this time a particularly large and hairy guy just grunted into my face and everyone ran away. I found this really frustrating, not only because I had no idea why I'd succeeded this time, but failed last time, but also because I had no idea if the health and ammo I'd used was a complete waste. Did I have to kill a certain number of enemies? Could I have just run to a certain spot and let them take me down? In a game where conservation of resources is crucial, it seemed particularly galling to have used so many and not known if it was for a good cause. It was almost certainly no big deal. It was early in the game, and in my admittedly limited experience, Resident Evil games are relatively fair with handing out resources. But at that point, all I really felt was frustration, which was compounded by the fact I didn't know how justified it was. This is arguably more of a me problem than a game problem, but again, that's mostly the point of this video. And finally, I want to briefly mention Teardown on the PS5. Another example where I can sum up the reason I didn't play it in one very short sentence. There was no option to invert the camera controls. When you've spent literal decades only ever using inverted controls on console, it feels really awkward when you're forced into the alternative. And vice versa, no doubt. I could have adjusted and it probably would not have taken too long. But the simple fact that the developers had chosen not to include the option was mystifying and did a fair bit to diminish my goodwill towards the game. It really was a baffling oversight. Fortunately, the developers seem to have come to the same conclusion, and the option to invert the camera was introduced a couple of weeks after launch. So maybe I'll go back to that game. Anyway, these are just some of the many games I've passed on, for reasons that may seem dubious. I hope you won't condemn me too harshly for them. Honestly though, with just how many games there are out there in the world, just waiting to be played, pretty much any reason to skip a game is valid. Even if you do end up just playing more Path of Exile. Let me know in the comments what games you've skipped and for what dodgy reasons. And thanks for watching. Don't forget to like, comment and subscribe. Apparently the like and subscribe buttons light up now whenever someone says like or subscribe. I don't know how it works, if it just happens automatically or what, but I've seen it happen in other people's videos. Like, subscribe, subscribe. Did it work? Did it make you feel more like liking and subscribing? Did it appeal to the reptile part of your brain that responds to movement and flashing lights? Either way, get off my lawn.